So as you can see, Penny is still with us. She's been talking to us about discovering she was dyslexic later on in life, much like our next guest, who's on a mission to help early diagnosis, making his first ever Loose Women appearance, and hopefully not his last. It's former Health Secretary Matt Hancock.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Great to be here.
Hi, welcome.
Yeah.
Don't be nervous, we're going to be nice to you. Ish. Now, look, you're here to talk to us about your own dyslexic diagnosis and the journey and the fight you're on at the moment to try and have better early diagnosis. But I know that you were watching when the ladies were talking earlier.
Yeah.
Was there anything that they were saying that really chimed with your experience?
Yeah, the story that you were just describing so powerfully, that when you get diagnosed, it's like a penny drop moment, right? It's one of those moments when things make sense that previously didn't. I was watching you describe that and thinking that's exactly what happened to me when I was 18 when I was diagnosed, and all of a sudden things that had happened throughout my childhood made sense.
Does it make you feel almost emotional as well?
Oh yeah,
the realisation of that.
And because suddenly you understand yourself better, and you think, well, it's not just that I'm useless at something; it's just that my brain works differently. And you know, when I've been on this campaign to get children diagnosed in school and to have screening, everybody's screened, so that we can find out who is likely to have dyslexia. You know, some people still say to me, oh, no, but you don't want to label children. But that's so wrong, because you label yourself. And you label yourself as essentially as stupid, when it's not. It's just that your brain is wired differently. And that means we can't support people
But it's not just about labelling children, though, isn't it? Because you took about 20 years to come out as being dyslexic, because there is an element of society that still labels adults, even when they're being honest about dyslexia. And were you worried about the way that your contemporaries, those within your own party, would react to you if you were more open about your diagnosis? Yeah,
I was diagnosed at university, and then I didn't say anything about it, and I hid it.
Why?
I felt a kind of shame. And I felt that it would be harder in my career. Somebody helpfully had invented spell check, which you know, got me through the first years. And then, eventually it was when I was appointed to the cabinet, and I had a new private secretary, and I said to him, look, there's something you need to know. You've got to make sure that on every note that goes in my box at night, you put a one-page cover note so that I can read it and I can decide whether I want to take the time, because I read slowly, take the time to read the whole thing, or if it's relatively uncontroversial, to delegate that decision to another minister. And he said, why is that? I said, well, you're coming into the circle of trust here, but I'm dyslexic. He said, well, I'm dyslexic too. He said, and it's he sort of took me on. He said, somebody in your position, you've just been put in the cabinet, you should talk about it. So that
inspire others.
So that, you know, if children and parents of children who are diagnosed as dyslexic can see that you can end up in the cabinet as a dyslexic, then they will have the, you know, if it helps one person to be more confident, then that's great.
Did you talk to Boris at the time, because you were Health Secretary at the time? Did you raise that to Boris, the importance of just, you know, raising the awareness of dyslexia and changing policy perhaps in education? Did you raise that to Boris at the time?
Well, it was before he was Prime Minister, but I talked to... Yes, I then became I talked to a big group of civil servants privately first, because there's actually an association of civil servants who are dyslexic, so I went to talk to them. The response was very positive, so then I was persuaded to go public, and, you know, you just described it as coming out. When I said... I was really nervous about it, and when I said I'm dyslexic, the response was incredibly positive, warm, you know, people really being encouraging and getting in contact to say thank you for saying that, and I hope we just should talk about it all more.
I think it's great to show a little bit of vulnerability as well. You know, yes, I'm in this position and I have this power and I have all these amazing qualities about myself, but I'm also a little bit vulnerable, because whether or not I want to, you know, embrace the fact that I'm dyslexic, but it tends to be an embarrassing thing to have to admit. But once you get it out the way and people understand that there are many other qualities that you have that the dyslexia is actually, you know, something to raise the flag about, and like a superpower, I think you've mentioned before.
It's kind of the stigma, isn't it? Well, you know, being dyslexic myself, like yourself, I think I hid it for many years, worrying about the labelling and the stigma and actually whether you would get that job or whether you'd be seen differently. And when we talk about stigmas, although we're talking about working somewhere or how your work colleagues would think, I think about relationships as well. You know, the worry of talking about it to your partners and your children. Did you know, ever think about how you'd broach those conversations with your partner or with your children in regards to being dyslexic?
Yeah, well, actually, at home it was... it wasn't a problem because we were all dyslexic, you know, my 3 children. But they got early diagnosis because, you know, we made sure that they did. And then they got the extra support that they needed when they were at primary school. So that's why I'm so
vital.
You know, now I'm on a mission to make sure every primary school student gets screened so that we can have that early identification, because I think it will really help, not just this sort of emotional thing that we've been talking about, but actually in practice as well, to get them the practical support.
And that's what the bill is all about, but I'm not saying it's an easy step, but it is an easy first step, because without a complete overhaul of the education system and the way that we deal with children who are neurodiverse, not much is going to change. Because we have so many kids coming out of school who, all 3 of these ladies, labelled as stupid when they were at school because they were neurodiverse and they didn't know it. And there are so many kids that is still happening. And even if they are diagnosed, the school setup isn't there to be able to help them. So it's easy, the early diagnosis, but then what happens next?
Yeah, so early diagnosis is like stage 1. And I know from my time in government that if you don't measure something, then you can't manage it, right? So early diagnosis is important so that we know who is dyslexic. And it's astonishing, this statistic, that only 1 in 5 dyslexic kids gets identified at school. I found this stat, and it was about 5 or 6 years old, and I thought that they must have sorted that and improved on that. So I asked for the updated stat, and it came out it's exactly the same. So that needs to change. And then you need the teacher training, because every teacher is a teacher of neurodiverse kids, of dyslexic kids, dyspraxic, kids with ADHD, and then you need the extra support to be able to go in. You need the whole package, and ultimately, it's about making sure that every child can reach their potential.
All this costs money, Matt. It costs money.
Well, yes, and so yes, it costs money, and it's important that that goes in. But it's also about how training is done. You know, there's a certain amount of time in the teacher training programme, and I think more of that time, relatively, even if there weren't more time overall, more of it ought to be in this, in terms of spotting kids who are neurodiverse and then how to support them. Because there's research out there into how to do it.
We're not just talking about dyslexia, even though today we are, but there are lots of other conditions. There's ADHD, there's Asperger's, there's lots of other neurodiversity that we need to look after and that we need to manage and that we need to spot early. Are we sort of including that within this sort of package, if you like?
Yeah, so my proposal in a bill that I'm putting in front of Parliament next week is for early identification, early screening for dyslexia, because you can do that relatively straightforwardly by essentially measuring the difference between a child's written ability and their oral ability. You know, I've got the gift of the gab, as you do as well.
Free, though, isn't it?
These things are available, but it would take a bit of time out of the school year to do the test. But then also teacher training for all neurodiverse conditions, because that is, you know, the teachers need to be able to spot it and then know how to respond.
I've got a couple of quick questions about work. Your work, obviously, not mine. So firstly, I mean, if you look at the statistics of those who are neurodiverse in the country, there ought to be more people within your workplace in the government who are neurodiverse but perhaps don't talk about it. Have they talked to you privately about their own diagnosis?
Well, more MPs are talking about it in public. When I started to talk about it, there was Brandon Lewis was also in the cabinet, and he talked about it, and you know, we're like London buses, dyslexic cabinet ministers, and then and there's more MPs who are talking about it, and I would say to any colleague, you know, if you're diagnosed with a neurodiverse condition, talk about it, because you know, the people do not hold it against you. That's my experience. Because you're more vulnerable. Right?
Absolutely.
And
Last
we're
question,
only human.
Matt. Just out of curiosity, did you back Boris in the vote?
Yeah, of course. I just want us to be able to move on as a country. And so that's what I want to get on with.
Well, to use a line from your boss, we'll draw a line under that conversation. Right, there is, of course, support for those who want to sort of talk about their diagnosis and to also get more help. That's via the ITV website, so do check that out. But thanks to both of you for joining us. That was quite fun.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.